Hi, everyone. I'm Robin. I'm one of the organizers for Hacks Hackers, and really excited to have for our first speaker tonight my former FT colleague, John Burn-Murdoch. John is senior data visualization journalist at the FT, and many of you will probably have seen his nightly Twitter threads informing us of what he's having for dinner that night, but also letting us know the latest updates to the numbers tracking the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. So really excited to have John here with us tonight to take us behind the scenes a little and talk about his process for making and updating those charts nightly for the FT's coronavirus tracker page, which has now been become the FT's most viewed ever page. So over to you, John.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. And yeah, I guess I'll start by answering the opening question, which is I'm a hack and a hacker. And I guess this whole project, this whole story is a classic example of that mindset. I'm going to share my screen with you shortly, which will show how much hacking I've been doing and how sort of sprawling this whole operation is. But yeah, so the last month has obviously been pretty crazy for all of us. It's been pretty crazy for me in sort of in one particular way, which is that I've tweeted a chart one day, which I thought I was just, putting out onto the internet to make a specific point for one story I was working on. And now I spend every evening updating that chart and getting that information out to the world on how coronavirus infection rates and death rates around the world have been evolving. So I've not got a huge amount of time tonight, so I'm going to try and give you a sort of whistle-stop tour of what's going on. And I've not got a huge amount of time tonight either, because these hours between sort of 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. are when I do all my chart updating. So you'll be able to see some live action here. So yeah, I guess just to start with, I'm going to share my whole screen here. So as I say, be warned, it's pretty chaotic. But so yeah, just to show you what we're talking about here. This is where it all began. So this chart here was something I put out on March the 11th. So about 5 weeks ago now. It was a chart aimed at showing how all countries in the Western world seemed destined to follow this same trajectory for coronavirus. So we've got the number of days into their outbreak that each country is along the from left to right, and the number of cases piling up in each country vertically. And this was just a chart I did for the one story, making the point that as time went on, most countries seemed to be on this same path. There was an inevitability. And the idea there was to get across the point that countries needed to look at Italy to see what was happening there, to learn what might happen to them later on down the line as well. That chart I initially actually did just made it for a colleague to show. She was asking me how many days behind Italy was the UK. So this was initially just a internal use thing, but obviously we felt it was worth putting out there. But you see from the engagement it got down here that the chart really seemed to resonate. So the next step after that was we promoted that chart to lead on the FT's coronavirus trajectory trackers page, which for those of you who haven't seen it, first of all, what are you doing? Second of all, this is what that page looks like. So we've got a series of our charts here tracking outbreaks in different countries across the world and different regions within those countries. This is myself and several other colleagues producing the graphics on this page. And you'll be pleased to hear this page is also free to read. So that was the next step in the evolution of this piece. It was getting such a huge reaction, and we were getting hundreds of responses every day from people saying, this is an important piece of journalism, this is public health information, why is it behind a paywall? And after some umming and ahhing behind the scenes, we are a subscription news organization. We don't drop the paywall simply because lots of people are asking, but we did decide that there was a good case for doing that. So March 23rd here, so 12 days after the first chart, we decided to bring the page out from behind the paywall. As a result, the page had already had huge amounts of traffic, but as a result, it got an even bigger influx here. And, some people might think, oh, taking the paywall down, that seems like it's a good gesture, but is that necessarily the best thing from a business sense? But of course, what this does for us is it allows hundreds of thousands, and in this case, millions of people who don't subscribe to the FT to get onto our site, to a piece of content that they really, really want to see and is important, and we like to think has been well done. And it demonstrates to them what the FT does. It demonstrates that we do brilliant finance and business news, but we also do loads more coverage of global issues like coronavirus and of all sorts of other things. So this wasn't just a case of charity from us. This is actually a way for us to demonstrate the value of the work we do. And to that point as well, one of the great things about this piece has been really seeing people demonstrate the value of visual journalism. So I'm just going to show you a couple of the kinds of responses that we've had to this. So this was an email that I got a few days in from someone saying they enjoyed the graph so much they took out a subscription. So that's not something we hear very often, but it's an explicit demonstration of the value of the visual journalism that we're doing. And another one here from someone saying they've taken out a new FT subscription simply on the strength of what we're sharing on social media. So again, for anyone who's ever said, oh, I'm a journalist, but I don't know what those data nerds, those graphics people are doing in the corner, what we're doing is getting more people to subscribe and to pay our wages. So yeah, it's always nice when the sort of circle of life is that explicit. Other stages of the development on this project. So one thing people, and many of you watching this may have asked questions yourselves, and one thing that happens a lot is after putting these tweets out, I'll get a flood of questions from people asking, why we've made certain choices with the graphic, about the logarithmic y-axis, for example, or why we're not adjusting for countries' population sizes. So one of my colleagues in the video team actually had the idea. He came to me and said, let's do an explainer video on this. So we've now got an evergreen piece that we can point people to, where it was just me sat in my lockdown home working sort of home office, dining room table, to be honest, just talking about, just dealing with these FAQs really of the questions that people often asked about this graph. And again, you can see from here, just within Twitter, this video has been viewed 600,000 times. So again, I suspect this is now one of the most watched pieces of FT content in terms of video. So a great idea there from my colleagues on the video team to save me time as well. Instead of having to answer the same questions hundreds of times, I can say, here's a video where we explain everything. Other interesting bits and pieces that have come across along the way. Again, I'm able to just point to previous threads and explainers that I've done on Twitter in the past, so that these questions can be answered in a sort of explicit visual way. And sometimes not just sometimes, quite often, we very deliberately respond to reader feedback in how we change these charts over time. So if I go back to here on the left, we've got a chart here showing about 10 countries, and we're tracking the cumulative numbers of cases of confirmed coronavirus cases over time. But by the time you get a few weeks down the line, we're now showing new numbers of daily cases. So a completely new metric, because the story by this point had moved on. It wasn't just about how many cases are there in my country or how many deaths are there in my country. It was about, are we flattening the curve? Are we hitting the peak? So we're still making the cumulative charts, but we've changed to focus now on new daily cases. You'll also see we've got these stars representing when different countries locked down. And in this particular case, I was experimenting with smoothing the lines on the charts to make them a bit more readable. So there was a whole process here showing how this is what the raw data looks like. If I were just to plot the raw data that we get out of the various agencies tracking coronavirus, the lines would look like this. That's completely unreadable. It's very noisy. You can't really see what's going on at all. So a decision has to be made about smoothing those data points. So do we do a rolling average like this, which is what we've been doing for a few weeks, where we just take the new deaths over a 7-day period and divide them by 7 to give you an average? Or could we do something a bit more computationally complex, where we try to smooth the lines according to their trends? And this was a classic case of, I think anyone who's developed an app and has made some changes to that app and published a new version will know the feeling here. So we thought we'd made a smart decision here, smoothing the lines, giving a lot cleaner visual aesthetic to the whole thing. And, I explained the full logic behind doing that. And if I'm now going to go to where I said, what do you think? And the overwhelming number of responses here were, if I just get past my dinner pictures, it looks like Twitter's struggling. But anyway, the overwhelming response there was people saying, I don't like the new thing, go back to the old thing. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like at scale, we've now set up a completely new email inbox. This is just for people responding to our charts. And you can see the whole screen here is just emails that have come into us today, asking questions about our charts, offering suggestions, a lot of people sharing their own charts that they've made. So we now have, and you can see one of my colleagues, Martin Staber, has done some brilliant categorization and tagging of all these emails. So we've got this huge universe now of well over 1,000 emails that have been sent to us, with constructive criticism, with sometimes less constructive criticism, with interesting feedback, with suggestions, with, as I say, people's own work, all about this one set of charts we've been doing. So it's been, pretty overwhelming in some senses, but just amazing to see how much this stuff resonates with people, how much they care about it, and to really use it as an opportunity to get our work and the FT's work and visual journalism out there in general. So I'll just very quickly, in my last couple of minutes, I'll just give you a tiny little behind the scenes look at how this all comes together. So what I tend to start with each evening is, I've got a list here of all of the data sources that we use to get data for each country and each region within those countries. So I've got the official numbers here that come out of Belgium. I've got Turkey's official data here. I've got the French Public Health Ministry with their official numbers. Italy puts out a nice little press release like this every day. Of course, the UK being the UK, it's a tweet. But being a bit of a Twitterholic, I don't have to go very far to find that. Various GitHub repos. This is sub-national data in Switzerland. What else have I got up here? I've got Brazilian data there. I've got Chinese updates, which list the number of new cases and deaths that they have every day. And I've got a Korean Wikipedia page, which is where I keep track of the number of deaths in the province, the sort of city province of Daegu. So that's step one, is pulling in all the data. And then I clean that and add it into a huge spreadsheet here. So this is all my sub-national data that I've got here. I pull in data for certain new countries here, like the major countries where we really want to have the latest of the minute data. So this is all coming into Google Spreadsheets. And then I flip over into the statistical programming language R, which many people will be familiar with. And I've got a bunch of scripts here. So this one is cleaning all the data for my death charts. This one is bringing in all sorts of additional sub-national data. And this one here is dealing with the data on new cases. And so all these scripts are doing is pulling down that data, some of it from external data sets, some of it from my own research that I've just been showing you there, and cleaning it, calculating the various averages and stuff that we use, and then spitting out some CSVs, so some spreadsheet files. And what I then do is I hop over to my web browser here, and I use that data to make the charts themselves. So I'll just quickly go through how that works with one of them here. So this is all done, I've done all this using the D3 JavaScript visualization library. So I've got one window which has our mobile size, desktop size, and extra large size of the charts. And so all of these charts generate based on the code that I've written. So I don't have to write code for 3 charts. I write one set of code and it fills the 3 charts. And my only task then is to say, all right, these labels seem a bit crowded, so I'm going to move the German label over there. I'm going to move the UK one up here, the Spanish one up to there. I'll move China a bit, that kind of thing, and do a similar thing on the other charts. And then I just press one button here, this Chrome bookmarklet, and that downloads my images. And straight away, I've got a flat PNG here, flat image that I can tweet or I can put into our CMS. It's updated the timestamp for me at the bottom. It's got all the latest data, and that's how it all comes together. So yeah, I'm probably already a couple of minutes over, but that is essentially the story behind the charts, the behind the scenes of how it all comes together. And this will soon be what I go back to as soon as Hacks Hackers is over. So there we go. Let's take a look at the questions. You're muted, Robin, sorry.
Thanks so much, John. Hi, everyone. feel free to put your questions into the chat rather than the Q&A. And also, if you click on the little blue button in the to field, you can also switch that to all panelists and attendees if you want sort of everyone to see your question. So first one, I'll just reel off some of the questions that are in there. John, do you weight the data from different countries depending on how they measure it?
So the short answer is no, but we do think about this a lot. So one thing that I think gets missed, because these charts look pretty clean and everyone thinks this is it's just data, so it's all very objective and simple. We actually I have daily conversations with our correspondents in China, in Japan, in Iran, in Germany, all of these countries, to talk about exactly these issues, like which countries here should we be a bit skeptical of, how are the countries doing things differently. So one big issue at the moment, for example, is how some countries are including deaths outside of hospitals, so in nursing homes, and some aren't. So I am now adjusting our data to account for that. So for example, I want the UK to be I want you to be able to compare the UK to another country and not see that the UK looks better just because we're not including nursing home deaths. So I monitor that. I have a source at a Belgian university, and he sends me data every day, which includes a breakdown of Belgium's cases by hospital and non-hospital. So I can strip out the non-hospital ones and give a better like-for-like comparison with the UK. So yeah, we're always making those decisions about how we should adjust the data to make it as meaningful as possible based on what we know is happening in each country.
Cool. Next, I'm going to group together a couple of questions around workflow. So like when you pull the data from those various sites you just showed, do you do it manually? And this whole sort of like pulling the data in using R, sort of exporting it out, is that a custom-made workflow for these charts, or is it pretty standard practice at the FT? And then finally, how do you do QA? How do you do quality assurance on something that moves so quickly?
Sure. So yeah, the sort of data pipeline, it has changed over the weeks, which feels like years. So we started off with using data solely from Johns Hopkins, which I think a lot of people will be aware of. This is the big US university that does loads of epidemiology work. But there are a couple of issues with that. One is that they seem to enjoy changing how they spelled country names every day. So it would continually break our code. I think we went South Korea, Republic of, Korea, that kind of thing. So the data quality there was a bit of an issue. But also the challenge as a newsroom is that if we've just written a story talking about the numbers of deaths in a country breaking a record, our numbers have to be up to the minute. So using an external data set like that, which is only updated once a day, is a bit of an issue. So we then changed to use the site Worldometers, which some people might be aware of. Worldometers is good in the sense that it updates frequently, but the problem is they tend to pull in data from all sorts of sources, some of which are more legitimate than others. And so that was leading us to sometimes introduce errors into our own data because Worldometers had pulled in some data which turned out not to ultimately be true. So it's now a combination. So we use data from Johns Hopkins and the European Centre for Disease Control and Prevention as our starting point every day. And I then top that up with the sources that I was just showing you in the browser. So new numbers from different countries. Pulling that in via R is then fairly standard for us at the FT. So we now have, there's an ever-growing number of us who work in R now, probably about a dozen now, of people who are R literate. So pulling in data from external sources, cleaning it up, saving it to CSVs, making charts, that's now increasingly common way for us to work on things like this.
Cool. And now that you've been doing this for about 5 weeks, what's the biggest challenge? What's the hardest thing about doing this?
Good questions. I mean, by which I mean there's multiple answers to that one question. One hard thing is just the fact that every evening I have to make these charts. Obviously it's an incredible privilege to be able to do this, but the particular timing because of when European countries, and I'm particularly looking at France here, when they put their data out means that 7 p.m. is really when I can get started on this. However, I'm still starting my working days at like 8 or 9 in the morning. So it's fairly full on. But no, I think a more serious answer, knowing that so many people are sort of hanging off these charts for how they're understanding coronavirus is a huge amount of pressure. I don't mean that in a sort of negative sense. I mean it in the sense that I am constantly questioning the decisions we've made. Like, should we be showing China on these charts? Do we trust their data? Should we be using a 7-day rolling average? Like, should we be just adjusting for population size after all this time? So just knowing that the decisions that we make affect how people experience this, they affect how they perceive their country to be doing, is a hell of a lot of pressure. And then, yeah, the final thing is, it's, the story is constantly moving here. And so one chart that might be brilliantly insightful one day might have lost a lot of its utility a few weeks later. So knowing when to sort of kill the charts, as it were, and introduce new ones is a big challenge as well. So yeah, hell of a lot of challenges, but it's incredibly rewarding. And I feel like the response suggests it's very worthwhile.
Cool, thanks. So we've got to move on to the next speaker soon. So just one last question, which is sort of, can you talk a bit about what you've seen in terms of sort of attention and interest over time? Are you worried about people getting data visualization fatigue after a number of weeks? Like you're fatigued, but in terms of the readers, does it become overwhelming for them after a period of time, or is it a case of sort of interest grows because you're doing this on a regular basis?
Or yeah, a bit of everything essentially. So I mean, to answer the last one first, I definitely think the daily updates to this are a huge part of why it succeeded. I was one of dozens of people making very, very similar charts when I put the first chart out. But I think what keeps people's interest is they know that when they come back every night, they'll see something new. And that's sort of basic audience engagement stuff, but really, really makes a huge difference. I think in terms of the other points, which were, I've suddenly blanked.
Does it get overwhelming for people?
Sure. Data is fatigue. Yeah. The nice thing is, no one's forcing anyone to look at these charts. So I think what we're seeing by now is, I mean, apart from people who follow me on Twitter. So if people have muted me, I completely understand. But we're still seeing huge traffic to this page. And that suggests that there is still a big appetite for it. We're still getting very engaged responses. We still get pretty decent time on page. I certainly would not blame anyone who was tired of these charts by now. I think if people say, all right, I've seen this loads of times and it never changes that much day to day, if someone has that view and they therefore stop checking it, absolutely fine by me. But generally, I think the response has been one of, people are really seeing the value of data visualization now much more. People, as I say, are explicitly mentioning this in their comments, in their tweets. And I think, sure, maybe this particular chart, some people will never want to see again. But I think a hell of a lot more people now are familiar with data visualization than were before. I've had friends and colleagues tell me that they've been explaining these charts to their mum or their aunt or their granddad because they're now everywhere and people want to be able to understand them. So I think for data viz literacy, it's probably been a good thing, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, John. And sorry to the folks whose questions we didn't manage to get to, but as you saw from John's presentation earlier, he is getting back to a lot of people that email him and his team at, what's the email address again?
I really should know that, but let me just check. The email address is, which of these many tabs have I got open? Sorry, this won't take more than a second. The email address is coronavirus-data@ft.com.
-data@ft.com.
There we go.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
I'll let you get back to today's update.
All right. Thanks a lot, folks.
Bye.